Hello and welcome back to GBN America. I'm very interested today to be speaking to Jeff Swartz, who's going to, I hope, explain to me the recent Crumbley case where a mother has been held responsible for involuntary manslaughter following her son's mass shooting. Mr. Swartz, can you explain to me the legal principles that underlie this and what led to this case coming before the courts and the decision being made as it was?
Okay. Involuntary manslaughter is basically, in this instance, either the violation of a legal duty that is owed to the public to do certain things to prevent harm to others, and that what you did was the cause of the ultimate harm. The other theory is that there was gross negligence in what people consider to be a common law duty, and therefore, because you did not take the first steps or some steps to prevent it from happening, you are held responsible for what somebody else does. And that's kind of the theory that was used here. The problem that existed in the Crumbley case from the very beginning, which really didn't pan out, was that you also have to have that causation I talked about. And there were intervening causes that resulted in the shooting that took place on the part of the administrators of the school, as well as the fact that Mrs. Crumbley said that I was not in charge of the gun, my husband was, and he's the one that hit it, and he's the one that did things, and so therefore I am not responsible because my husband may have violated some duty, but I violated no duty to anyone.
And the husband is also being charged with involuntary manslaughter because he's the one who actually bought the gun, and there are some suggestions that school officials should also be prosecuted in a similar way.
Yeah, the father is responsible, at least according to the mother's testimony, that he not only bought the gun without her knowledge, that she didn't really approve of him having the gun, that in fact the father took responsibility for placing a trigger lock on it and from hiding the gun and ammunition from their son so he would not attempt to use it or play with it or whatever else he wanted to do with it. When they were not around and did not take him to a shooting range, which was the only place he was allowed to have the gun in his hand. As far as the administrators are concerned, there was a meeting at the school before the shooting took place. The administrators wanted the parents to take the child out of school, but they said that he really wasn't dangerous, so the parents said, no, we're not going to take him out of school. We'll pick him up at the end of the day or he'll go home. The administrators, still apparently now having some fear, decided to place him back in a classroom rather than keep him isolated from the remainder of the student body, and that's when the shooting took place. It was their failure to act, that they had a statutory duty to act, that resulted directly in the cause of the death of the 4 kids.
And how old was Ethan Crumbley at the time of the shooting?
He was 15 years old.
He was 15 years old, but oddly, he was charged as an adult and sentenced as an adult, whilst at the same time his parents are being prosecuted for him as a child. Isn't that inconsistent, and shouldn't the courts settle that one way or another? Either he's an adult or a child.
Okay. Chronologically, he was still a juvenile. What happens is it's not that he's charged as an adult, that you are an adult person. They charge him in the context that he is mature enough to be responsible for his acts as an adult and to be sentenced as an adult, which is what happened. They did that because in the United States, juveniles cannot be sentenced to life without parole, except under specific circumstances. They held a hearing and said, we're going to sentence him as an adult simply because he's not redeemable, and so therefore he should spend the rest of his life in prison.
So his sentencing as an adult doesn't imply that he had the judgment of an adult, because obviously if he were genuinely an adult at the time of the incident, his parents wouldn't have a liability, I wouldn't have thought.
Yeah, if he had been declared an adult as a person who can do all the things that adults do, like contract and get jobs and live on their own and all the things that go what they called emancipation. If he had been emancipated, then they would not be responsible because he is, in the eyes of the law, truly an adult for everything that he would do. Here, this was just a mechanism to provide adult punishment to him for something he did as a 15-year-old.
And does this case have wider legal ramifications? Because there's been another terrible shooting recently. There seems to be a constant flow of these awful murders that take place, these mass murders. Do you think this is going to bring other people into responsibility for them beyond the murderer himself? And I think it is almost invariably himself.
That's correct. The real problem here is that because there was no statutory duty, although Michigan has passed a law that took effect 2 days ago that actually make it mandatory that parents secure firearms, or anybody secure a firearm in their home so that it can't be used by someone else. What the state wanted to prove is that there was a common law duty to do those things, and the failure to do that is gross negligence, and therefore it is involuntary manslaughter. The problem is you can't limit this ruling or this verdict to strictly guns. It could be any type of weapon. For example, if your 16-year-old gets mad at somebody down the block and he comes home and goes in the garage and grabs a baseball bat, and he goes down and he beats some kid's brains out, is a parent now held responsible because they didn't secure the baseball bat? If he runs in the house and grabs a cleaver, meat cutting cleaver out of the drawer and runs and starts chopping at somebody, are you now liable because you did not secure your cleaver? It really is one of those things where there is just a broad array of things that are weapons that now could be used as a basis to go after parents for the acts of their children.
Yes, and not just parents, clearly, that this may well apply to schools as well, and to other officials, and that therefore you begin to spread the net very widely.
Well, that's true. In the United States, school administrators generally have immunity for doing things while they are in the process of carrying out their duties, at least civilly. That's the reason why these two administrators in this case were never charged. One is an administrator in a different school in the same district, and one has moved out of the district and is working as an administrator in that district. And the district they worked for in Oakland County did not want to have them charged, because if they were, that might leave them open to liability for their acts financially to the parents and the families of the 4 children who were killed.
And isn't this, in a way, however you look at it, just skirting round the major issue of the constitutional right to bear arms? As you may or may not know, the UK Bill of Rights, or strictly the English Bill of Rights, maintains the right to bear arms for the maintenance of a Protestant militia. But because our constitution is not codified and can be changed by legislation, we have very, very tight gun control. Your Bill of Rights maintains the right to bear arms for a militia, and yet is almost unchangeable and seems to allow widespread use of guns for evil purposes, but there isn't any will to change that or control that.
There isn't, and that's a major problem. Yes, the Second Amendment is an issue. I teach constitutional law. The Second Amendment is something I talk about frequently. The truth of the matter is that there was a comma that's in the Second Amendment that no one pays attention to in the first sentence, and believe it or not, they just skip over it. In the Heller decision by the United States Supreme Court, they found that owning a firearm is a personal right, as opposed to something that is basically created for the purposes of being part of a well-regulated militia. I've always said the United States was built on 2 things, guns and booze, and guns have replaced booze as probably the most important thing in people's lives. It is really bad that we do not regulate certain types of weapons. It is constitutional to do that. There is a reasonableness standard that applies to the application of the Second Amendment, and it is not reasonable, for example, for people to own machine guns. That law has been in place since 1937. We had an assault weapons ban from 1995 to 2005, but the Bush administration allowed it to lapse, so it was never renewed. During that 10 years, mass shootings and serious shootings with multiple victims diminished to a great degree. But the minute that statute sunsetted, all of a sudden everybody was buying AR-15s and AK-47s. Although they are semi-automatic versions, you can buy a $50 kit to convert your weapon into a fully automatic weapon, which is illegal to own, but lots of luck finding out who owns them. So the truth of the matter is that the Second Amendment has been misread. The Heller decision misread it, but it is we are a victim of the National Rifle Association and the lobby in Congress that prevents, and state legislatures that prevent the passage of gun control, legitimate gun control laws that are reasonable and applicable.
And so the state, the nation, doesn't want to do it, so it's falling on parents. Mr. Crumbley faces charge 2. What do you think is going to happen in that case?
Well, I don't know where he's going to have his trial. He will try to change the situs of the trial from Oakland County. That would mean it would probably go to somewhere like Grand Rapids, which is a different area, more gun-friendly area. He might do better in front of a gun-friendly jury who don't want the kind of restrictions placed on them and or the liability placed on them, and they take it personally. I don't know what's going to happen there because the question will be whether they can get a jury when they try to pick one. If they don't, they will move to situs.
Okay.
If he stays in Oakland County, he will face the same fate as Mrs. Crumbley. He will be found guilty, if not because he really is liable, but because there is anger in the community, and the state was trying the case to try to get the jury angry throughout the entirety of the case so that they want to take the deaths out on someone, and they seem to be the fall person.
And understandably, with murders of this kind, people want to find somebody responsible, so it's a natural human emotion. Well, Mr. Swartz, thank you so much for joining me and for the constitutional legal explanation. I'm very grateful.
My pleasure. Have a great day.
I'm particularly pleased to be speaking to Asra Nomani, who is the author of Woke Army, a senior contributor at The Federalist, an investigative journalist who's been previously with the Wall Street Journal. Ms. Nomani, thank you so much for joining me. And tell me about becoming a Muslim reformer, what that means and what you're trying to do.
Gosh, thank you so much for asking. You are looking at a Muslim feminist. I am a girl born in India to conservative Muslim parents. My parents were socially conservative. We immigrated to the United States like so many families immigrated to the United Kingdom, and I was 4. It was the summer of 1969, and I grew up with the feminist revolution, Take Your Daughter to Work Day, and I also grew up with something else, and that was the toxic exportation of an extremist ideology of Islam from Iran and the government of Saudi Arabia, starting with their revolutions in 1979. And it was really a dichotomy for me as a girl growing up in the West. I grew up on this girl detective named Nancy Drew and learned to be an empowered young woman. But in my community, I was told that I had to take the back door when I went to the mosque. I had to pray in the basement, the dungeon, the upstairs. That to look at me was to turn to stone. And I lived this bifurcated life for most of my life, but it was the 9/11 attacks and then the tragic murder of my dear friend from the Wall Street Journal, Danny Pearl, that made me the Muslim reformer that you see today, challenging the extremist interpretations that governments and millionaires are trying to infuse in our communities.
And you faced a lot of resistance from this, from the Council for American Islamic Relations, which you say has launched a character assassination on you and wants to silence you. How does this influence you? Does this make you more determined, or is it quite intimidating?
It's both. Put your finger right on it. You know, no matter what community you're in, it is daunting to stand up to power and control. But what I learned from my friend Danny's murder is that so many innocents will lose their lives if we do not challenge extremism in our communities. And you know too well that the man who kidnapped Danny was a British Pakistani by the name of Omar Sheikh, indoctrinated in the mosques of London, a dropout from the London School of Economics. You know, they are kids amongst us who are indoctrinated, who try to intimidate us into silence, and then they are the elders, too, that, you know, try to pressure us to silence. But this organization that you spoke of, the Council on American Islamic Relations, they are part of this network that I call the woke army that is trying to silence anybody who stands up to Islamic extremism. I know that a lot of viewers would be among those people, and I want to just encourage everyone to stand up with moral courage, because silence is how they get complicity, and we cannot be complicit in their extremism.
And you've titled your book The Woke Army. Perhaps you could explain a bit about the woke army, and also the word woke is an interesting word because it's often used to mean extreme political correctness and use of language to make sure that it's not offensive. But actually, radical Islam isn't woke in that sense at all. It's very unsympathetic to feminism or to other rights that people now expect to have.
Yeah, exactly, Jacob. I mean, it is anti-woke, you know, it is illiberal. And, you know, that girl that I was describing to you earlier, I was a classic liberal all my life. You know, what is a feminist, right? I'm fighting for women's rights. I'm fighting for human rights. But classic liberalism and compassionate conservatism, or whatever you may call it today, are married now today in the center against this woke army that is in extremes in society. So how does it spill over into our streets and on our campuses today? I brought a couple illustrations. The Islamist part of it, this is what we call the people who are involved in political Islam. So this is the illustration of my book, you know, the star and crescent that captures Islam. That's the green. So what have they done now? They have come together with people right now in these protests against Israel, for example, that carry signs like this. It says, it might not be on screen completely, but stand with Palestine, end the occupation now. And who is that party? The Party for Socialism and Liberation. You'll see this classic white and black poster. You'll see this yellow poster from another one of the far left groups called Answer. And what has happened is that they've got this unholy alliance, this marriage of convenience, to destroy the freedoms in the West as we know it. That's their common goal. And they're going to come for all of us. You know, they will come after the Muslim reformers, the women who dare to live like I do with the wind in my hair, and they will come after free speech. You know this too well, Jacob, and you know that they will come after nation states like Israel, the Jewish people, as is happening today. And that is why, you know, we must defeat this woke army. They are the opposite of an awakening for our nation. They are actually the death of so many freedoms. And so we have to stand up and be vigilant.
And the sort of left woke are, in a sense, the useful idiots of Islamic extremism, aren't they? Because they are trying to clamp down on freedom of speech, but this is allowing an extremist view to be put forward in an unchallenged way.
Yeah, that's the ultimate irony. They are useful fools, I say, to use a kinder word, but they are... I know, just a little kinder. What they
You're
do
nicer than
is
I am.
I know. I'm a mom, and you know, always listening for that kid that might be watching. You know, why do I feel it so personally? Because those classic liberal values that I love about this nation in America and in the UK and in the West are freedoms that I could not know in any Muslim country in the world. I'm a single mother, Jacob, without a wedding ring. That would make me a criminal in so many Muslim countries. I believe a girl has equal inheritance to her brother, not the Sharia law of so many governments in our Muslim nations. Indentured servitude, slavery, these old antiquated institutions are still part of our Muslim communities. And these illiberal ideas are what the far left is accepting. And that's their hypocrisy. You know, that is ultimately what I have learned as a person, as you probably have also, that we have to constantly have this conversation in our heads. Like, do I live with moral congruence? And they are incongruent. They are inconsistent, and they are fools indeed.
And anything that's said in this area is potentially very controversial. Tell me about the Welcome to Dearborn, Americans Jihad Capital article and the reaction to it, and particularly President Biden's reaction.
Yeah, there's two elements that really are interesting about this op-ed that was published in the Wall Street Journal. One is the reality that it captures of an extremism in this city of Dearborn in Michigan with a very large Arab population. That is a reality. And that is why London has sometimes been called Londonistan, right? Because in mosques, in communities, in bookstores, at Quran study circles, this extremist interpretation that I grew up with from my childhood days is being preached as the gospel. So that's one aspect of the piece. It's just straightforward. The second was the reaction to it, right? And one of them was President Biden, denouncing this op-ed, and his administration denouncing it in order to curry favor with the voters in Michigan that he has very swiftly alienated because of his support of the state of Israel. There's a dance he's doing with people in our community who are antithetical, I believe, to U.S. policies on support for Israel, support for Jewish people, and he and the Obama administration signed this deal with the devil, with these Islamist groups, and they are continuing to do that dance. And that's what that reaction was about, trying to criticize anybody who would talk about this true reality that's happening in our communities that we've got to remove.
And this seems to me to be very interesting politically. We're seeing it in the United Kingdom as well, that parties, particularly on the left, are torn between a strong Muslim voter base and the Jewish people that they also seek to represent. And there's been a horrible upsurge in anti-Semitism. And watching the United States from abroad, I've been very surprised that the support I thought would be completely absolute for Israel has been fraying at the edges because of this political change that the Democrat Party particularly is wrestling with.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I don't know who began it, but I think the trouble began in your birthland, as everybody likes to blame the British. The Labour Party had this unholy alliance. The Democratic Party also adopted it. And I see, Sadiq Khan is in trouble today for this misstep where he said, we are proudly anti-Semitic, and he made a slip up. He was trying to say, we're proudly anti-racist and anti-Semitic. But that's the game. I mean, it's such a language and word game, right? And of course he would fumble on it because they are very anti-Semitic. And the Democratic Party has gotten also in this alliance with people who are very anti-Semitic. They want to destroy the state of Israel. And what they have done is, I wanted to just share this image. This is a photo of students in a school in Langley, Virginia, which some people might know that city is the home of the CIA, Langley High School. Two kids from one of them is from the Muslim Students Association. You can't see maybe the drawing very well. I'm going to show it to you close up. It is the American flag. I mean, the British audience should really understand the just historical irony of this. We fought to create this flag, right? And what happened is this kid replaced the stars with swastikas and wrote in here, Free Palestine, in the stripes. Because from adults to children now, this corruption is happening. It's infusing itself through the Democratic Party, organizations like Justice Democrats, Socialist Democrats, all these lofty sounding names, and it's getting into the minds of children that are now perpetuating a real hate and I think bigotry that should not be part of our communities and our societies.
Well, that's very extraordinary, because I know that the flag to Americans is as symbolically important as the royal family is, as the king is in the United Kingdom. So that's an extraordinary picture. But I was going to ask you, you're influential, you're a powerful commentator, you've written this important book. What is your message to the younger generation?
Oh, thank you so much for those kind words. Mine has been a lifelong struggle to come to clarity about the right values that we need to promote in this world. And my message to the younger generation is, whether you are in faith or not in faith, practice, goodness and kindness and a sense of compassion for others that is not foolish. There's a concept that I write about in my book that a dear friend of mine, Orly Petter, a psychologist, called suicidal empathy. And that is where we allow our brains to get hijacked by the images and the TikTok videos and the memes that are designed to hijack the back of our brains so that our wiring doesn't allow rational thought and clear thinking. And so I just gently recommend to everyone that express kindness and goodness in the world and rational thought and critical thinking. That's what made me a Muslim feminist, and that's what makes me, such a just dedicated citizen in our world to serving humanity and making this world a better place. And that's what I want them to do also.
Well, Asra, thank you for that beautiful message. I think, speaking as a Catholic, that I can't think of a better way of encapsulating such a fine message of hope for the future. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you so much.